And Blue Book was terrible. Blue Book didn't get the best cases. They were rerouted to the Air Technical Intelligence Command. Anything that was really a good case. Blue Book got the lower level cases, and still they couldn't explain 30% of them, and still came up with a negative conclusion, as did the Condon Committee and the Robertson panel. And after they came out with this negative conclusion of UFOs, the Air Force shut Project Blue Book down. So that sighting, the Hillsdale, Michigan sighting, effectively led to the closure of, Blue Book and our military getting out of officially studying UFOs in a public arena, because of course they're still studying them. And that year was an explosive year, 1966, because there was a bunch of other school sightings that year. Jim and Coral Lorenzen, they were the founders of APRO, the Aerial Phenomena Research Organization, and really the leaders of UFO investigation, period. Without them, we wouldn't be here today, talking like we are, because they were the first citizens UFO research organization. And they put out in their newsletter, guys, we got a bunch of school encounters. These objects are hovering over schools. Right, this is right after the Michigan case.
Okay.
And this is in 1966. Oh, so I've actually mixed up some of my dates here. The Ariel Zimbabwe is 94. This is 1966. It's a huge year. Raymond Fowler has 20 cases on that spring. He says 8 of them are over schools. And it was 2 weeks after the Michigan case, this is what I meant to say, that we had one of the biggest cases ever, which is in Australia at Westall High School.
Mm-hmm.
And man, oh man, is that a case.
When you think of NASA and exploration of space and so forth, this is what it's all about, right? Trying to discover, like, oh my God, we're being visited, or there's life outside of this planet. And what does that say about our creation and so on and so forth? But going back to what you said, can you just kind of expand upon the last case that you made mention of?
Yeah, the Westall High School case in Melbourne, Australia, 2 weeks after Hillsdale, Michigan. It's a weird pattern that turns up in schoolyard cases. One will occur, and then another one 2 weeks later. And then a year later, to the day, there's this weird timing aspect that I'm like fascinated by. Mm-hmm. And the Westall case, oh my God. There was like 300 students at the school. Mm-hmm. 2 to 300 people saw this, maybe 400. A lot. It's Australia's most widely viewed incident, most famous incident for sure. And it began around 11 a.m. All the kids are out on the playground. Well, not all, but there's a group of them. And so that's another weird thing. These sightings are, I think the ETs know when recess starts because they're there. And somebody comes running into Mr. Greenwood's class, and Mr. Greenwood's the science teacher, and says, "There's flying saucers over the oval, the sports field." And the bell is about to ring. All the kids laugh at the announcement and jump up, and they're going to run outside. And Mr. Greenwood's like, "Sit down. The bell's about to ring. We can go out in just a second." Well, the bell rings, and they all go rushing out, and sure enough, there are flying saucers over the school, 3 of them. They're clearly discs. They've got, no windows that they can see. They're featureless. And they're hovering, they're darting, they're going around in circles, they're appearing and disappearing. One's coming lower and lower. 4 or 5 Cessnas show up at some point, planes, and they start circling the school and trying to chase these objects, which are just darting around like, easily evading them. Mm-hmm. The kids are screaming. The teachers are having no luck controlling the kids at all. At least 4 teachers saw this, probably a lot more. Mr. Greenwood sure saw them, the science teacher, and he's like, yeah, they were flying saucers. Most of the kids rush up to the fence. There's a fence at the edge of the playground, and one of these objects lands in the trees behind the school. This little grove of trees. Mm-hmm. This is a pattern I've seen case after case after case after case. The objects land behind the school, right beyond the fence, in the grove of trees. It's really strange. And so a bunch of the kids like, oh my God, and they hop the fence. This was something that they normally did to, sneak a cigarette or, make out or play hooky or whatever.
Mhm.
There was a little area there, the Grange, they called it.
Okay.
And all these kids are hopping the fence and they're running towards it. One girl gets there early. She faints dead away. They find her just lying there. About a dozen students, and actually a neighbor also saw it, an adult. And its object just landed on the ground. And they're practically surrounding it. They can feel it. There's heat coming off of it. It's featureless. They're 10 feet away from it. It's about the size of a car, and it pretty much as soon as they arrived, it lifts up, turns on its side when it's about 10 or 20 feet up, and darts away. And shortly following that, all the other objects, circle around and they go away. And on the ground, you can see these landing traces, crushed grass and burned ground a little bit. And all the students are like freaking out and they're running around, and finally they go back to the school. And by this point, the military is showing up, full on army, people, guys in camouflage. The police are there, the press is there, the media. Some of the students are being interviewed right in front of the school. Army is not happy about it, and they shut that down. All the kids are brought into the school. There's going to be an emergency meeting in the auditorium. At the same time, some of these kids are being brought into separate offices and questioned alone by military officials and threatened not to talk about it, told not to talk about it. These are kids. Their parents aren't there. The teachers aren't there. This is,
Right.
I'm not sure how legal this is. At any rate, finally they held this assembly, and the headmaster of the school says, nothing happened. You didn't see anything. There's no such thing as UFOs, and you certainly didn't see any UFOs. And whatever you saw, it doesn't matter because you're not to talk about it. And that was the extent of it, really. There was no explanation given. Some said that, he mentioned that it could have been a government experiment. But definitely not to talk about it. It wasn't UFOs, and UFOs do not exist. And anyone who talks about it will get detention. And you get detention. The girl who talked to the media, she talked to the media again, got detention again. So there was an immediate cover-up of this incident. A bunch of the students after class, they let school out early, went and saw the landing traces. At some point, they blocked those off and then plowed them over, burnt the whole field over. There was an article written about it, 1 or 2, maybe 3, but that's it. And it was faded from history for years until Shane Hurd, the main guy who's researching this, started looking into it. And he's interviewed some 150 witnesses at this point. So it's a great case. There's a few other really famous cases. It was 1 year after that. There was the Crestview Elementary School case in Opelika, Florida, 1967, and it's virtually identical. Same thing, except there's elementary age kids. Object lands behind the school. There's Army shows up during the incident, closes school down. They're patrolling the halls. Kids who can walk or who rode their bike to school are sent home. The objects are still there. The Army is guarding them. And the rest are, sent home on school buses. So that was another amazing case that was covered up and effectively, again, had a few articles about it, but never heard about it after that. So there was another case in Broadhaven, Wales. That got a lot of publicity. Again, they saw ETs coming out. And again, this had a lot of publicity, but sort of faded away. And when I heard it, I read this one account and it gave me chills, and I still haven't been able to find it, and it just makes me mad because it was such a weird case. This kid describes how he was in class when Greys walked into his classroom, Gray aliens.
Gotcha. Right.
And,
I recall reading some of what,
yeah. And he said time stopped, and it was the weirdest thing because he's looking around and nobody's moving. And suddenly he can't move, and these Greys are walking up and down the aisles and they're doing something. He can't tell what. And next thing he knows, time has passed. time is starting up again. The grays are gone, and everyone's acting like nothing happened.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a few other cases just like that.
Amazing. You know, I'm always just fascinated with there's certain things that are just commonplace with what you've described in your books and everything. And it's like, it's not just isolated. Like, I think when you try to understand what's happening with this, maybe, I mean, if you want to look at it from a standpoint to say, oh, maybe it's like a government experiment to some extent that we don't know about. But what's interesting is, like, these are like globally, these cases happen around the world. So you can't just isolate and say, oh, this is just happening in the U.S. And it's several other significant things that are associated with what you've described. And you've even mentioned that in your book that was just outstanding to me. And one of them was like, these aren't some things that are just happening at night where it's just like lights in the sky. These are like broad daylight significant sightings that you just cannot deny. And then so that's one outstanding component. And the other one is also that the amount of witnesses. It's not just one person saying, oh, I saw this, and, you know, there's nobody else to validate that. You can corroborate like a mass group of folks or individuals, you know, regardless of age. These things are something that are significant that you just cannot ignore. And I love the fact that you have that all in the book, and then independent cases. You have that. You have those same kind of underlining things that happen in these cases, which they, again, if you can put them all together, you're like, wow, something pretty major is happening here. That there again, it's just undeniable. Can you, Preston, talk about, like, you have, I mean, one of the things about what you do, your attention to detail is just like unbelievable. I'm like, man, how does he come up with like finding out certain, you know, significant, down to the minute, finest things of the accounts? Like, how do you go about when you do an investigation? Like, do you have a particular procedure that you follow within, like, looking into some of the details surrounding these cases? Can you kind of give some backgrounds to, like, your methodology, like with logistics? Like, how do you go about setting up and trying to, like, connect the dots or support some of the claims? Right.
Well, I mean, each case is different, and it depends what facet of UFOs I'm researching. Okay. Like with the Schoolyard stuff, I'm like, okay, well, I'm not going to be able to go to Zimbabwe. I don't have the funds, you know, and most of these cases, I'm not going to be able to interview the witnesses. So this is going to be a difficult research project for sure. I do have a big UFO library, you know, gosh, I don't know how many books, but there are hundreds. And magazines stretching back to, you know, when I joined MUFON, the Mutual UFO Network. I'm like, all right, I'm subscribing to your newsletter, and I want all the past issues from when you started. And so I've got, you know, access to not only MUFON, but there's the National UFO Reporting Center. That proved to be a great resource. APRO, you know, Jim and Coral Lorenz and stuff. QFOs. There's all these UFO organizations, NICAP, who provided a lot of historical material. I was subscribed to the UFO news clipping service for years and years until it folded. And so that was a great resource. So all these books, and, you know, what I found is most major researchers have at least one case like this. So that, you know, and I'm like, all right, so let's dig in. And that's what I started compiling these cases, and got a real shock, because I knew that there was, you know, 5 famous cases. I had a couple of my own. I'm like, well, gosh, every other researcher has one too. Oh my God, you know, it's worldwide. You know, it stretches back to 1950. I found the earliest case I could find was 1853, but it really started in the 1950s. Really? Yeah. Okay. But goes to about 1950 onward from there, and when I can find a witness, then I'm happy, because then I can really dig in. Like, I was speaking at Contact in the Desert, and about undersea UFO objects and UFO healings, which I've written about. And this lady comes up to me and she's like, oh, I saw a UFO when I was a kid. And right now I'm in the middle of this schoolyard research. And she's like, yeah, I was on the playground. I'm like, oh my God, really? Because there's that weird coincidence has happened in this field. and people walk up to you and I'm like, all right, I'm researching that. I'd love to hear. And she described this. So when you get a first-hand witness, you do a preliminary interview and then a follow-up interview. You can tell pretty early on when a person is lying or not. Most people are like, no, you don't use my name, and I don't want to talk about that part. I'm not ready, and they'll start crying. Some of these witnesses, or you can certainly tell that they're sincere, at the very least. So there's all different ways of doing research, but when you get in this project, I was able to trace, several cases firsthand. So that was a real treat. But most of the cases are, from a wide net of research that I brought in. So it's both armchair research, I guess you would call it, and field work is, I think, the best way to do it. There's, just retyping other people's accounts. Who cares? I mean, you really have to get out there in the field, get your fingernails dirty, and get some first-hand cases nobody's ever heard before. And I've got a bunch of those in the book because, it wasn't hard to find some brand new cases. Yeah, I am a member of MUFON. I took their field investigator test. It was really hard.
Really?
Yeah, it was a take-home test. I thought, take-home test, this is going to be easy.
Okay.
Because we can just look it up. This was before the internet, but there were libraries. And it was hard. There was, it was on UFO history. That part was easy for me. I had all the books, but there was a section on photography, a section on meteorology, a section on astronomy. So a bunch of stuff that you really had to study up on, like types of clouds and weather. Well, I did take a bunch of that in college. I was really science-oriented as a young man. So I was able to do pretty well. I got a great score, actually. I made a few stupid mistakes, or I would have had a perfect score.
Wow.
But yeah, I did a lot of field investigations for MUFON initially. Now I'm more independent, but I do speak for their groups all the time. And I do support the organization. My problem with the UFO organizations is they're trying to push this subject forward, and they're having a real hard time with it. APRO was infiltrated by the FBI. They proved it. So was NICAP, and it led to the death of NICAP. There's QFOS. MUFON's the largest organization. They've had a lot of changes of membership, a lot of disgruntled, a lot of controversy. And their membership kind of stalls. It stays there at a couple of thousand, and I'm like, why? We know the government is watching. We know this. And to say that they are not watching MUFON would be naive, incredibly naive, because this subject is taken very seriously. They're spending an enormous amount of money on it. They know it's real at the highest levels of the military and the military-industrial complex. They absolutely know it's real, and they're using our tax dollars, by the way, to make us look like fools.
Sure. What's your personal opinion on why you think that's the case, Preston? What do you believe as to why it's so, the whole mystique behind it, and why is it so clandestine? Or why is it their mission not to have this be something that's completely disclosed?
I think there's 2 or 3 main reasons and a bunch of others, really. Okay. The main reason being this is a phenomenon that's been around for years and years and years. I mean, centuries. We know this. There's Renaissance paintings. There's Middle Age paintings.
Right.
There's hieroglyphics, petroglyphs, rock carvings. We know it's been around for a long time, but not like this. Since 1947, the atomic age, it's been nonstop. They've been crashing, So this has been a real problem to deal with. And when these UFOs showed up in large numbers and started hovering over our military bases, from a military standpoint, it looked like we were being invaded, and we were. I mean, clearly we were. So they can't really go public with this yet. And I understand that. Probably they should have when that Roswell crash happened. And that press release was put out that said, we've got one. They backpedaled. They should not have done that. It would have been a very different world. and this subject would have been far more progressed. We probably would be having open official contact, but they didn't do that. They threatened witnesses, and we can get into this, but it was the decision they made at that time, because from a military standpoint, this is a national security issue. And I totally agree, because they don't know what it is, and it is doing things, I mean, stopping cars down the highway. They're turning off our military, our missiles, our nuclear missiles. So our military has painted themselves into a corner. This is a policy that they've followed from day one. That's the main reason why there's a cover-up, because that's how they've always done it. Second is greed and power. There are people who are running the world. You know, we all have to work for a living, and there's 1% who has all the money, literally. And we know who they are. It's the bankers. It's the banking industry, the pharmaceutical industry. It's Monsanto. It's the insurance industry. It's the oil industry. These guys are on my naughty list. They know who they are. They are the ones who are controlling the subject, the very high levels of the military industrial complex. The 1%ers have the ET technology, and they're not going to give it up without a fight, you know, because they have all the money, and they don't want to give that up. And if the military, you know, how do you release this kind of stuff? It's a sticky thing. So that's another main reason. To give an official announcement that say UFOs are real, well, then you're going to have about 1 million people saying, I'm being abducted, and I am suing you for not protecting me and for lying. Right? So and that would be just the beginning.
Very true.
So that's another problem. So there's all these sort of, I mean, if this technology comes out, what's going to happen to the religion? What's going to happen to the economy? There's going to be a big upset. We can take it. It's going to happen. And this is what we're seeing. There is a cover-up, yeah, but it's at this point an open conspiracy. Everybody knows. More people believe that our government is covering up than don't. There are hundreds of whistleblowers. The cover-up has been a complete disaster. Every major UFO researcher out there has whistleblower accounts.